we'll get started right away. Maybe some people are gonna start pouring in a bit later. Fabric has been all about being this end-to-end analytics platform that's been out for like over a year now, or not over a year. Well,
almost a year.
Yeah. Well, and so February has been this February 2024 has been all about Fabric here at Datashift. A lot of that has been going on internally, but Cedric and I also had the opportunity to speak at the Fabric February event in Oslo, which was the first time that was organized, and I think it was a great success. So what we're going to be doing today is the talk we delivered there. We're going to be doing that today as well. That's going to take about 25 minutes. We're going to have 5 minutes for a Q&A session. So any questions you have, you can put them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer these. If you still have any questions afterwards that have not been answered, please just let us know, and I will make sure everyone gets their questions answered. After that, we're going to be talking shortly about what we saw in Oslo, interesting things we heard, people we met, insights we're bringing back with us. So let's start talking about using data activator and event-driven data validation to deliver high-quality data products. So it's quite a mouthful, this title, but I think so. It is in fact a use case. It's a case that is a great example of what we do at Datashift, and I'd like to start with that. Just to give a bit more context about what it is we've been doing with Datashift for 9 years now. And it's really in our motto, which is achieve impact together. That means achieving the ambitions of our clients to have a real impact on business outcomes for all stakeholders involved. And it's really important we do this together, like developing relationships, build on trust, trying to inspire the people we work with. That's a very valuable thing I think we try to bring to the table. We're active across industries, across data domains, and the aim is really of being an end-to-end data partner. So it's all about helping you make the right decisions and then putting them into practice in a solid way. We've had the opportunity to work with clients of all sizes, both Belgian and international, and with technology of all kinds, always aiming for that, technologically aiming for that perfect fit for purpose. And I think this Fabric use case is a great example of that fit for purpose mentality. And we'll go into that in a lot more detail in just a moment.
Yes. Thanks for the introduction, Frederic. So I'm Cedric. I was also there in Oslo, and so I'm going to start the session and dive into the content. So what can you actually accept from the session? So of course we're going to talk about data validation, and Frederic will also guide you through the technical setup in Fabric itself. But personally, I believe it's useful to discuss technologies from the perspective of a real use case. It's more fun to listen to a story, and it also makes it more tangible. So we'll start by shortly providing you with some context about the case we tackled at one of our clients, and this will be the guideline through this entire half hour. So just to be sure that everyone is aligned with the terms of data validation and event-driven processing, we've listed up some frequent drivers for each of the concepts. So data validation. So for us, it was actually, we divided it up in three main questions. Actually, we asked ourselves. So does the data arrive in the format that we expect? Is the necessary data present? Is no crucial information missing? And last but not least is actually also the consistency. Does my data remain in the same format across different time series? So if I receive data today, is it still in the same format as the data that I received 6 months ago? So these were actually for us important questions to ask. So when we then look at event-driven processing, for us the main thing was actually, why did we choose for event-driven processing? The main reason was the timelessness. We really, for us, in this case, it was important that we tackle the issue as soon as possible, and that the time between the detection and the process that took place after detection was as short as possible. So what was the situation at our client? So our client is actually a well-known streaming provider, video streaming provider, and they offer their services via app, via different platforms. So app, smart TV, and web. And to steer their business, it's crucial that they understand how their customers behave, of course, and therefore they look at what they call tracking data. And what is tracking data? These are all it's a collection of all the user interactions that happen within each of these platforms. And with user interactions, I mean, for example, impressions. An impression is an event that is fired when something actually is shown into the screen window of the user, but also clicks when they really click on contents. For example, in the video player, when they click on play, that's also a specific event that is captured, and that's important for us to report on. So what also important in this story, it's also important to know that the entire product itself is developed by an external party. So we are not the ones who are responsible for the integration of the tracking SDK. So this is all done by an external party. We only consume the data. So why is it actually so important for us to detect these kind of data quality issues as soon as possible? Because the missing data is directly impacting also the personalizations in the app, and also impacts what our business users are seeing in the dashboards and reports and so on. And the third, but not least in this case, and it's actually one of the most important things, is as soon as there is an issue with the data, it's impossible to recover it. We can't retroactively fill up data. So and that's also an important reason to really start the process as soon as possible. So now I'm just going to shortly list up the criteria for us, which were important to tackle this situation. And I've already mentioned the timelessness, the time between issue detection, between the detection of the issue and the process. So we wanted to make sure that it was as short as possible. Observability. So for us, it's also important that we have a visual overview, that we can that we have a direct impression about the impact of an issue. Is it an issue that is only occurring for 1 minute? That is possible. Then it's probably not so important to act on. But if it's an issue that is already occurring for 5 or more minutes, then yeah, we really need to start looking at the reason and start the process afterwards. And also the alerting. And that's also something that is what Frederik will now show in the setup in Fabric. So Frederik will now guide you to the technical setup, and afterwards we are shortly reviewing also the solution and making sure that you understand what was the impact of the solution that we integrated.
Nice, thank you, Cedric, for that. So I ended the introduction saying that we have this fit-for-purpose mentality, and what I want to show on these couple of slides is really why that is, and why Fabric is this really rich extension of what historically you might have considered to be Power BI, being it, this familiar interface, and how this really makes use cases like these, which I myself never associated with a tool like Power BI or an ecosystem like the Power Platform to actually enable this, to really drive this point home that Fabric is something new and something exciting. So if we start with timeliness, you can see how we get near real-time data movement into the lakehouse in Fabric. Not only that, but because we're using Direct Lake, we get near real-time data movement into the semantic model as well. And if you add to this automatic page refresh on your Power BI report, you get near real-time data observability really from the source all the way to your report. And the reason why I think this is so important and why Fabric really enables this thing as an end-to-end data platform is because I didn't used to think about Power BI as something that would ever have enabled this kind of use case. We've had streaming data sets in Power BI for a long time. It has been part of that, but you had to integrate with other services, integrate with Azure. And as you see on this slide here, for this technical setup, we're sourcing the events from Event Hub, so that's still in Azure. But then the Spark job is running in Fabric. It's pushing the data into the lakehouse. We're doing direct lake to get the data into the semantic model, and then automatic base refresh to get that near real-time data observability right inside Power BI. So if you talk about that observability then, so really that visual overview of issues over certain amounts of time, and Cedric is going to explain later why for this use case this was so important, or this is so important for the business, for the stakeholders involved, is that we really try to build Power BI visuals that are specifically tailored for quick issue identification. And then the last part, alerting, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that because it's also a very new thing in Fabric, the data activator experience, where we're going to be using Reflex, so if we can get that on the slide, to notify us of possible issues through Microsoft Teams. And it's a really seamless integration, and we're going to be demoing in a few minutes what that actually looks like. So I might disappoint some people now. It's not going to be a live demo in the interest of time. And because I have not been praying much to the demo gods and goddesses as of late, or to any kind of god really. So that's why we're doing this on slide, but I can assure you that these are not mockups. If anyone feels like challenging that, please reach out and we can show you how this is actually running in Fabric, and maybe we can have an interesting conversation. I would really like that. And I think I'm quite proud of what we've built here in terms of what it looks like in Power BI. So the aim was really to have a very clear thing, and we're going to be coming back on that later because there was a really interesting talk in Norway given by Ben Ferry, also known as the Power BI guy, called "Report Looks Boring and Nobody Cares." I was really triggered by the title, and it was a great talk, but we're going to be talking a bit about that later on. And so I think this report looks quite boring, but still it gives us an insight into the key metrics. We see event volume, we see events with issues. We have a little bit of text. I think that's a really important thing, like don't be afraid to use text if it actually helps your report drive its point home. I think that does that quite in an effective way here. And so what we see here is when data issues start coming in initially, everything is green and everything is great. As more events with issues come in, we see the dashboard changing, right? We see it now says attention needed. We see in a couple of visuals, we have this breakdown by device class. We have this breakdown by agent. We have a visual overview of the timeline. On the bottom, we see, for example, like there's an increased volume, and with that increased volume also come these issues. So we have all kinds of visual indicators to show us what's going on. And again, as I said earlier, Cedric is going to be explaining why that's so important in this case. Obviously, it's Power BI, so we get all the functionality we know. We get mouse overs, which we can do in a really informative way. We get filtering across visuals, which we can use in this case, as you can see on the slide as well. So now that we've seen the end product, I'd like to go over how we set this up, and I'm specifically going to take the angle of the alerting part, because I think this is a really nice feature of Fabric in the data activator experience, where you create these reflexes, where you can actually alert people of things happening with your data, among other things being triggered by reports in Power BI. So that's what I want to show. So if we start at the end, which is how do we set this up in Teams, it's really, really easy. You can add the app to your teams right there by clicking that three-dot menu. You can see that app data activator, you add it, and that's basically it. And then once notifications come in, they look more or less like this. So the way we set this up, we say tracking data issue detected, too many user ID nulls. So these messages, you can configure them. And then when you click view details, you would go to data activator, and then you could dive into a little bit more detail. We're going to be showing that later on. How do we set this up from the port, right? So actually, when you set it up, you do it backwards, but I thought it would be informative to start with the themes thing. So once you have a report in Power BI, this is the way you would set an alert. So in the three-dot menu, again, on the visual that you're using, you get a menu actually in a pane on the right-hand side where you can do all the configuration of that alert. So you can give it a name, give it a threshold, you tell it where you want that alert to go. And it's a really elegant setup. Clicking through this might take you like a minute or two if you know what you want to fill in there, if you thought about what you want to be reporting on. It's just click, click, done, you confirm it. And at that point, you will get the events coming into Data Activator when you need them. And so that's why we're going to show how we would do this setup then in Reflex. So this is what Reflex looks like. So you can see the events coming in. You can give them nice friendly names as well, which I think is rather important. And then you have this visual experience where it says select, detect, and act. And so these three things which have a pane of their own, where you can see really clearly, as in this example, what the time period was in which so nothing was being triggered. And then you can see actually the issues that we saw earlier on the dashboard, you can see them coming in. Then the detection part, so there's all kinds of things configurable here, like when something becomes, in this case, greater than or equal to 3%, and every time it goes over that threshold for this case, we actually want that trigger, and that's what you can see on the screen. And the third part, act, you can select who the recipients are for that alert, set it up through Microsoft Teams, and actually there you can see the alert that we saw earlier on the screenshot. That's where you would configure that. So the quick recap of the experience we had using Reflex here is, I think it makes building near real-time solutions faster and easier. So I'm not saying this is like a data observability solution killer for products on the market that specifically do that. But I think it works really well for quick data monitoring and quality checks. There's things built in for this kind of case. It's perfectly what you need. You don't have to leave any kind of environment. You know, it integrates seamlessly with Teams, which if you're using Fabric, quite likely you're in the Microsoft ecosystem. So people are already watching Teams. It's not a different tool. I think that's a great benefit. As you could see, like setting up the alerts from Power BI was really straightforward. One thing we noticed, and we did discuss that with one of the product managers from Microsoft we met during the event, is that as of now, you also saw it in the graphs earlier, we get these events only every 5 minutes. So it's actually more like polling Power BI. And that's also why the title of this talk in the specific context of Fabric is a bit of a lie, because you could argue, and in fact it would be a valid argument, that this is not event driven. But we did get the confirmation that I think it is still in this quarter or maybe next one, I forgot. We're going to get the possibility of shortening that window, so not every 5 minutes, but maybe every minute, every 30 seconds, as well as doing actual event-driven solutions, because that's part of the feedback we understood Microsoft received from customers as well, that's something they would really like. So that's going to be coming to Fabric, which means that we can actually do also this alerting part, this very last part, truly in an event-driven way. To close this off, I think that as you saw notifications, setting them up with this Data Activator app in Teams, it's also really straightforward. I would like to see the notifications be a bit more customizable. Maybe there's some technical information in there might scare some business users or is not really relevant, but also there I'm expecting developments from Microsoft to really excited to see what we're going to be getting there in the future.
Okay. So yeah, you have all that exciting stuff in Fabric, but you all do it for a purpose, right? You want to make an impact. You want to resolve a pain that you felt earlier. And for us, I think it's important to know to understand which process was triggered when we detect when we detect actually an issue. And before you start building, know that your solution will only be successful when certain actions follow after you detect a potential issue. And it sounds simple, right? But we often see data teams building solutions that and without involving stakeholders from the start. And that I think that is a big mistake because we actually took effort to discuss the entire process afterwards with the stakeholders from the start, and so they know what to expect when an issue when we detect an issue, and that's also one of the key things. It makes sense that it all starts with event notification, and that's already you saw that's already right in the screenshots. And these are pushed by Activator based on the trigger name. You already have an ID where you need to look in Power BI. So then we navigate to the Power BI dashboard. Of course, that's also pretty logic. And then we check the impact, and there we also saw that when developing our Power BI dashboard, it's important to think about how we structure the graphs to actually make them as actionable as possible. So they need to trigger action. We need to have a first glimpse of the impact of the potential issue, and that's something you really need to take into account from the start and take your time to do to really prepare well, actually. If we then, when we detect an issue, we inform the product team, in this case responsible for the tracking data. When we communicate with that team, we try to make the communication as precise as possible. So we add screenshots and so on, because in the past, when we didn't have this solution and we just we sent messages to Slack like, okay, we had a user who saw some anomaly in the data and blah blah. They often said like, yeah, but they often actually responded with some feedback like, which filters are you using? Have you already taken this into account? And so we want to make that case as precise as possible when we communicate to them. Then the other step is the business users, of course, because we detect now and we put a lot of effort in the time between the detection and the process that we start afterwards. But then it's also important that we proactively inform the business users which are using the dashboard that we already saw the issue and that the process towards the resolvement is already started. And this changes the perception totally, because in the past they were the one who saw issues in dashboards and contacted us, and now we are the ones who can proactively communicate to them. So that's a kind of big change. Also, when we discuss the process with the product team, when we initially started to develop this solution, we also agreed that they estimate from the start that they actually communicate about a time, so that they at least can give us an estimation about how long it's going to take to resolve or to do some kind of source analysis. And then the last two steps are pretty logical, I think. So they inform us when it's done. And the good thing about having these kind of visualizations in Power BI is also that you can directly see whether the resolvement that they did also impacts the data. Is it actually really fixed? Because you have something to validate. So if we then review the solution after 6 months, it all comes down to the perception of the various stakeholders. I think this was actually for me the biggest win in this case. So our finding was that mainly the trust has grown because they feel you have the things under control. So before integrating solutions, certain anomalies were queried via SQL, and we communicated those findings via emails. And I already said it, so many of these emails were challenged. And now we can make this case as precise as possible. And it changes the perception also from the product team, because they are actually at peace, like, okay, they have a solution that is already validating and doing some kind of quality checks, and we don't need to worry about that. And also for our business stakeholders, it's much better that we can proactively communicate to them. So these were actually the main. We are actually now in the driving seat. If we just summarize, I would just like to repeat two points, because two lessons maybe. It's like a kind of repetition, but I think it's important. So think about the process after detection from the start, and create your Power BI visualizations to make them as actionable as possible. So this is okay. So last but not least, 3 things to remember. So don't think you will not be confronted with data quality issues. So there are so many factors that can lead you into trouble, and many of these are out of your control. So wait, there is something on the screen. I don't know. Okay, I think it's okay now. You have the platform to set this up in an efficient way using Spark Structured Streaming, Direct Lake, and Data Activation in Fabric. So it's and the last thing is it's achieving impact is hard as ever, and therefore remains. So you can use as much as fancy technology as you want. Try to think about what you want to achieve from the start, and base your process on top of that. Involve your stakeholders from the start, business stakeholders, but also other technical parties. So yeah, this was actually our story. I hope it was pretty useful. So I think we now have some time for Q&A. So I'm really excited to hear potential questions you may have.
I see this one thing, and it's not actually, it's funny because it's not the first time I get this question when we're talking about this setup. It's why we didn't use event streams in Fabric, why we used Spark structured streaming. And I think there's a couple of answers possible about that, and we can get into quite a lot of detail where you're talking about, okay, you want to aggregate data over flexible windows. Maybe you already know how to use Spark, you're familiar with that, and so you might make that choice based on that. But in this case, the reason was way more simple. It's because the data issue that we're trying to detect in this case is whether a certain field includes null values or not. And in event streams, as it stands, you cannot filter on that condition. So there's greater than, smaller than, equal to, these kinds of conditions, but actually there's not the possibility to filter on null values. And also this, it was a great insight we got from going to the Fabric February event in Oslo, because we met a Microsoft PM, and immediately, like I think it was a couple hours later, he came back and he said, yeah, I checked, and it's going to be there in April. We're going to have that as part of the product. And I think this kind of commitment, that was really the vibe we got, and I think that's a great way to segue maybe into the next part of the presentation, if we don't see any other questions coming in, is the dedication that Microsoft has to really make this work for the community. This Fabric thing, like actually listening to the community, engaging with the community, the entire community building thing around Fabric that has been going strong, surrounding, for example, also Power BI for years now. You really feel that energy and that excitement, I think, when you talk to people, not only people who are using the product or trying to get this into production at clients or within their own companies, but also like people working at Microsoft. There's a general excitement about making this happen and making Fabric a great success. And I think that's really, it shows Microsoft's engagement in this context.
Okay, cool. So yeah, our talk in Oslo went place at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So despite the stress, we also managed to attend some sessions. And therefore, we thought it was also useful to use this next 10 minutes to give you share our findings on this. So maybe Fredrik, you can do the first one regarding Power BI.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, going back a bit to what I was saying earlier, I was really triggered by the title of the talk being "Your report looks boring and nobody cares." And not only was it a fun title, but I think it was a great talk delivered in a great way and a great reminder that there's a lot of exciting things going on in Fabric. But in the end, I truly believe that a large part of what we're going to be doing in Fabric in the future anyway is we're going to be showing data in a visual way. And so Power BI and Fabric having the relationship they have, talking about how to visualize data and putting things into narratives, I think is really important. And for anyone who's ever tried to develop visuals, working closely together with business stakeholders and trying to show what people are actually looking for. And that was the point Ben was making in his talk, is that if you try to make a fancy report with drill throughs and mouse overs and bookmarks and buttons and all these kinds of things, which you might think are great, you're going to spend a lot of time. But not only that, you're going to create something that might look or feel beautiful to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's also beautiful or useful for other people. And so he said, if you want to be pragmatic about it, you better have a boring report, but that actually answers all the business questions, because with a boring report, you're going to be bothering relatively less people and always a smaller amount of people than with a report that you might think is beautiful, but it might actually not be or not be useful for some people. And I think that was a really great point and a great reminder of when we're talking about Fabric, to not forget, like, well, that it starts from that Power BI experience, and that reporting or visually engaging with data is always going to be a big part of what Microsoft is offering there.
Okay, cool. So we also attended a session about streaming data in Fabric. This was the first time that we actually came into contact with that functionality. And so the good news is that many of the streaming services which already exist in the signups have been incorporated here. So during the session, they presented a case where data lands in an Azure Event Hub, like we also do in this case. But then the data is directly consumed by a KQL database. And so that KQL is now also part of Fabric. So it already exists in Synapse. They also integrated it in Fabric, but it also makes use of your capacity, of your Fabric capacity. So that's also a big change in terms of pricing. For those who are not familiar with the KQL database, so it's a type of database that was created by Microsoft. It's using vectors to really query large amounts of streaming data in a performant way. And what's also an advantage is that it triggers near real-time insights in Power BI, because normally you have two types. You have now three types of options in Power BI. You have the direct query, you have the import, and then the direct lake. But if you are using a KQL database with a streaming data set, you can use direct query on top of that KQL database. And it makes so these real-time aggregations pretty fast. And it was kind of impressive to see the performance. Of course, it's always a demo, and it's always in a ideal scenario, let's say, but the setup was pretty cool. And I also remember like so a KQL database was also pretty expensive in signup. So I'm also curious like how will it reflect in terms of capacity? So I think maybe speaking about capacities, that is also something we can conclude with in our final finding. So what's right, we also intended a session about that, and I think Fredrik, you can maybe elaborate a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. So we talked about the visual part. We talked about the technical part, and we kept, I think, is one of the most important parts for last. At least that was my reaction when Fabric first came out, and a lot of things were clear about it. But the thing that was like almost frightening me is like what is this cost model? And I think a lot of people, when I was talking to people around that time, a lot of people I met felt the same way, because it kind of feels like Power BI premium pricing, but then in a way, again, it doesn't. And obviously, through the months now since Fabric has been announced and it's been GA for quite a while now as well, things are becoming more and more clear, especially now because it's in the hands of clients, and so people are starting to actually use this. I have the impression also, on LinkedIn, you see this conversation. It's starting to pick up. Like there's real world experience now, and for me, it's really a relief because for the longest time, I was like, this is going to cost crazy amounts of money to run any kind of remotely performant workload. And that's why I was really interested in this talk given by Ed Eskins, and he titled it, Let Your Fabric Work, Load Testing Large Amounts of Data. And so what he was actually showing is that, and he did load tests on different kinds of provisioned capacity, so workspaces with more or less capacity units, and actually seeing how far he could push these in terms of how fast can we load the data, how fast can we process the data. And so obviously this triggers discussion about how smoothing and throttling work in Fabric. And I think it is still a complex matter. And so apart from the fact that the talk by Ed was really informative because he was showing this kind of thing like in an experimental way. So that's one thing. I think second, Microsoft does a great way of explaining this complex matter in their documentation as best as can, obviously, because the challenge is complex. So the solution is quite complex as well. So obviously you can't explain in 2 lines how this works. I think the rationale makes sense, and I don't exclude the possibility maybe that things are going to change. Also, if you read the docs, you can see that these things might be up for change, and I think that might well be the case. Thirdly, what I think is really helpful, you get this the capacity metrics app, which Ed also showed during his talk, in which you can monitor a lot of things, among them capacity overload information. So you might use these, you might use this kind of report to see what's going on, maybe make changes to your usage patterns if you really have to, because that's the entire idea behind the smoothing and the throttling, right? Is that this classic thing you have where you're doing analytics on a Postgres database or whatever. It's like, I can't schedule my workload at 5 in the afternoon because someone else's workload is running, and so we might block each other there. Like, I'm scheduling this at night because someone else needs access to the system in a performant way, or my ETL is running. So all these kinds of examples that are quite well known, and kinds of solutions you might have for these. And really what Microsoft is trying to do with this smoothing, especially for background tasks, because that's the kind of examples I'm giving here, right? Is you don't have to worry about that anymore. You don't have to provision your capacity for peak usage because you get this smoothing capability. And for background tasks, like for scheduled jobs, the smoothing window is actually 24 hours, which is a really long period. So it means that you don't have to worry about running 50 workloads at the same time at 6 in the morning and then running nothing during the rest of the day, because that's going to be smoothed out over the rest of the day. So you really get a lot of leeway before you hit these throttling policies. which I think is a great way of taking away some of the traditional pain that you would have when doing batch ETL on Fabric, and the way Microsoft trying to tackle that with this smoothing and throttling logic. So I think with that we can close the session. So thanks again for everyone who joined. Again, if you have any questions that you didn't get to ask during the session, we love to talk about Fabric. We love maybe even to show things in a more hands-on way, because demo on a slide is always a demo on a slide, but in a more informal setting, talking about what's actually going on and talking in an open way about the challenges when using these kinds of technologies, always focusing on the case we're trying to solve. I think that's something we do really well at Datashift, and it's one of the reasons I'm really excited about Fabric as well. So.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us.